Hi, I'm Annie Fitzsimmons. This is phase 2 of our team's discussion. Last week we talked about whether or not a team has to have a managing member and some advertising requirements. Today we're looking at the concept of agency within team membership. And specifically, when does a team encounter dual agency? Let's say that we have one team member who represents the seller exclusively and another team member who represents the buyer exclusively. Now obviously, neither of those brokers are dual agents. But if they have a team leader who is the managing broker for both of those brokers, then that team leader would be a dual agent. And in every case where there are two brokers licensed to the same firm, then the designated broker would of course also be a dual agent. Under the operation of the agency law, both the managing broker and the designated broker would be dual agents in that situation. All right, let's look beyond that scenario though. Let's look at a situation where the listing broker is a team member, and in team meetings, listing broker shares all of the information about seller's listing, including seller's confidential information. One of those team members goes out and attracts a buyer. First question, since that buyer's broker has confidential information from the seller, is that buyer's broker a dual agent, yes or no? The answer is no. That buyer's broker is a buyer's broker exclusively. Because under the agency law, a broker can only represent the seller if the broker has a written agency agreement with the seller, or if the broker is appointed by the broker's DB as a sub-agent of the seller. In most team scenarios, other team members are not appointed as sub-agents of the seller. They could be, but in most cases they're not. And so in most cases, it's simply inappropriate for a listing broker, even a listing broker team member, to share seller's confidential information with other brokers and even other team members. Instead, listing brokers, you have got to keep confident seller's confidential information. You share marketing materials with your team members and you encourage team members to go out and sell seller's house, but you don't share seller's confidential information with the team members. If that did happen, then buyer's broker, who's now the exclusive agent for the buyer, question is, must that buyer's broker share buyer broker's knowledge of seller's confidential information with buyer in order to advocate and further buyer's interests? And the answer is arguably at least yes. Buyer's broker would share that information, seller's confidential information, with buyer. That answer illustrates the importance of listing brokers, even listing broker team members, of keeping confidential seller's confidential information. Okay, let's look at one more scenario that I get questions about on the hotline from time to time. Let's say we have team members who are co-brokering, co-listing a piece of property for seller's benefit. So in fact, both brokers are appointed as agents of the seller. And it turns out one of those agents attracts a buyer, and the agents and the seller agree that the most efficient representation would be for this co-listing broker to represent buyer exclusively. Is that possible? And the answer is yes. The agency relationship between the co-broker and seller can be severed, but it has to be severed with the permission of both, or the consent rather, of both the designated broker and the seller. Both have to consent to the severing of the relationship, the agency relationship between seller and the co-broker. Now the co-broker is free to go and be buyer's exclusive agent, but along with the severing of that agency relationship, co-broker, former co-listing broker, is required to retain confidentially all confidential information that broker learned of the seller during the listing relationship. So the co-broker, the former co-broker, is allowed to go represent the buyer exclusively, but all confidential information about the seller's situation learned by that co-broker during the listing agency with the seller has to be retained confidentially. If you have questions on any aspect related to teams, send me an email. I'd love to field your question, try and give you the answer. My email address is legalhotline@warealtor.org. Thank you for being a Washington Realtors member.